empezar a...
Ya estamos transmitiendo.
Perfecto, entonces voy a empezar. Ok. ¿Listo? ¿Ves? Carlos. Ok.
Listo.
Tendrías que agrandar un poco la presentación, no, pero igual se ve bien, ¿no?
Quizás ocultar los participantes para la barra lateral.
Ok, sí, ajá. Sí, eso es.
No. Eso.
Ok, casi cierro la sesión. Okay, so good evening, everybody here in Eichstätt and in Bogota. It's a pleasure to have today Carlos Tello. He will present as a conference entitled The Brazilian Agricultural Frontier, Local and Global Developmental Discourses in the Forest. Carlos Tejo, he is currently a PhD candidate at the Hamburg University. He holds a double master degree in natural sciences and resource management and development from Mexican and German universities. He has worked on risk, vulnerability, political ecology, research projects from a decolonial perspective. He had opportunity to work on evaluating local laws for the conservation of natural areas in Brazil. Now he is working on analyzing the different discourses on and about the Brazilian Amazon land use and the forest from the pluriversal multi-epistemic perspective. So Carlos, it's a pleasure to have you here. The floor is yours. Let me know if you have heard well from what I said.
Yes, I have. Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Luis Peña, and also to the working group over there, to Silas, especially to Professor Dr. Miriam Lay. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure. It's an honor to be able to present today here to you today my work that I've been working as Luis said as my PhD project. And what I will be introducing today is just part of what I've been doing during these years. And yeah, he mentioned also that I will be presenting today the Brazilian agricultural frontier. And we're going to be talking about local and global developmental discourses in the forest. Please let me know if everybody can hear me well and everything, right?
It's yeah. We're hearing perfectly here.
Perfect. That's great. Then I would like to start a little bit with the agenda that we have for today. And we're going to be dividing this presentation in 5 areas. First, I will be introducing the theoretical framework, which I work with the theoretical framework of the pluriverse. Then I will be talking about the research area, which is the Brazilian Amazon. And we're going to be introducing a little bit the historical background of the Brazilian Amazon. And then we're moving forward to the research focus and methodology. Today, I will be presenting 2 particular areas of research focus, which is the media analysis and a ethnographic analysis that I conducted. And I will be also introducing a little bit of the research process, which I mentioned. This is a part of difficulties that happen during the research field, which I also think it's quite important to mention for these kinds of projects. Then I will be moving forward to the results, where I will be talking about the different layers of discourses about land and forest in the Brazilian Amazon. And finally, I will be presenting to you some reflection or personal reflection about this project and taking and giving you some take-home messages. So in order to start, I will go, as I said, to the theoretical framework, and I will be introducing the pluriverse itself. So the pluriverse, it's a Latin American way of thinking, or started as a Latin American way of thinking. Now it's spread all over the world with different techniques. And the pluriverse, sorry, no, okay. And I wanted to explain to you using this personal graph that I designed. While I was reading about the pluriverse, it became a little bit complex to understand a little bit the pluriverse. So I decided to actually design a graph to understand a little bit better what the pluriverse means or what it stands for. And the pluriverse stands first with the idea that there's a predominant one worldview. It's this black line, really predominant single direction on one way, stating how the world based on Western cosmology should be. It's based on scientific and rational thought. This Western scientific and rational thought is based on the idea of how progress and development should be. And it's also based on the creation of dichotomies, telling us what's good, what's bad, what's wrong, and how the world should be. And also with the idea of universalizing these concepts. So everybody should follow this line. And that's what the pluriverse says, okay, we acknowledge that this exists, and we have been working with this idea for a lot of time. But at the same time, the pluriverse itself identifies that there are other ways of seeing the world. It's this green line moving in different directions that identifies that there are different ways of knowing, different ways of doing, creating their own ontologies, their own epistemologies, and with this idea, creating their own discourses, their own way of thinking and living the world itself. The idea that the universal world exists and the pluriverse exists, they know that each other exists itself. So we also identify that there's also this purple line that it's another pluriverse, but it's been historically marginalized and suppressed by Western cosmology. That's the idea that the universal world, it's acknowledged or knows that there's other worlds, but they're always trying to suck them, you know, and trying to take them all the way to this universal line. So there are three things that we have to understand, or we have to go to understand the pluriverse. First, the pluriverse acknowledges the one worldview, this single line. Then it recognizes that there are other worlds and there are other ways of doing. But in this idea, they look for the way to thrive together. They look for the idea that there are many ways of seeing the world, there are many ways of existing, of entitling the world, but at the same time, we have to look for a way to thrive together. And that's what the pluriverse is about. It's a world where many worlds fit, where all worlds fit. And it was the Zapatist movement who said it first, but there are many other grassroots movements and traditional and indigenous movements that have been talking and embracing the pluriverse concept itself. This has been happening for a long time, but it's been recently that many authors in the global north, Latin American authors in the global north, started to write about how these people or how these communities actually start embracing the world, how these other perceptions exist. They've been mainly focusing on identifying and acknowledging groups that are distant from the one worldview and trying to talk and trying to discover how they can actually get together in a single one worldview or different worlds view. This idea has become so big that actually countries like Colombia, Ecuador, and Bolivia have been using the concept of the pluriverse and have put them actually in their constitution. So the political constitution of the country itself are using the concept of the pluriverse in an idea to acknowledge that this pluriverse will work. And today, with this research, we're going to be talking about the pluriversal discourses that are in the Brazilian Amazon. There are many other discourses that we have to acknowledge and at the same time to recognize, but that does not mean it's going to be easy. It's going to be a lot of discussion today, most probably because of the different discourses that we're going to be seeing today. So we're entering into the research area, and I would like you to please hold tight to your seats because we're going to be jumping today from our lovely Germany all the way to the Brazilian Amazon, a huge, mega diverse area. If we take actually France and Germany. If you haven't had the possibility to visit the Brazilian Amazon, we take France and Germany, and we will be able to feed it 6 times in the Brazilian Amazon. It's 9 states are parts of the Brazilian Amazon. It's about 5,000 million square kilometers, sorry. It's more than 2,500 species of tree and more than 30,000 of species of animal. And this is just a broad idea, but of course, it's not the only things that are living in this area, because there's about 30 million inhabitants living in this area. In between them, indigenous, quilombolas, riberinos, rubber tappers, miners, camponeses, many traditional and many indigenous organizations and groups that are living and thriving and linking together and entangling together in this enormous region. But I would like to get you way further into the Brazilian Amazon, and therefore I would like to ask you to close your eyes, whoever who wants, because it's a little bit late, so please do not fall asleep. It's only 40 seconds to close your eyes to get you as close as possible to the Brazilian Amazon. So whoever who wants to do it, please close it in 3, 2, 1. And now that we have the possibility, now you can open your eyes, and we have the possibility to be a little bit closer to the Brazilian Amazon. I would like to continue to talking. Why are we talking about the Brazilian Amazon? And of course, because there's tons of pressure on the Amazon forest, there's tons of pressure on land and deforestation. There are many things happening in the Brazilian Amazon, talking about the development of mega infrastructure, land dispute, livestock and agriculture, fire, mining, about many policies and laws and discourses that are being implemented and being putting pressure into the forest. This has become that here we have the 9 states of the Brazilian Amazon, and between 17 and 21% of the forest has been deforested since 1970. We can see, and we're going to be talking about the number 1, the state of Pará, because it's the main focus of this research today, and is the heaviest deforested state in the Brazilian Amazon. And what I'm going to show you now is not a painting. It's actually the Brazilian Amazon, and all of these yellow paint should be dots, and these dots is the accumulated deforestation in the Amazon from 2007 and 2022. And as we can see, there's a huge area that has been heavily deforested coming from south to north, which is the authors call it the arc of deforestation. And today we're going to be focusing in the arc of deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon. Of course, everything that we're telling right now, it's already creating a lot of discourses. And these discourses are being identified at a national level and are being created at a national level, but also at international level. And these discourses about the deforestation in the Brazilian Amazon have been having or have tons of implications at a local level. And we're going to be focusing also on these implications. So today we're going to be talking, as I said, of the Brazilian Amazon. We're going to be focusing particularly in the heavily deforested states, which is the state of Pará. And then we're zooming into one of the heaviest deforested municipalities in the state of Pará, which is the municipality of Novo Progresso. But before engaging to that, I would like to take you a little bit back in the story to explain you a little bit of the historical background and the developmental discourses in the Brazilian Amazon. And the Brazilian Amazon has a long history, but we are going always only to pre-colonial times, so not that far away. But since pre-colonial times, there's been already documentation that there's been a fight for resources. So pre-colonial groups that were already fighting for the resources that were in the Brazilian Amazon. But it's actually in the 1500s when there's a colonial movement arriving. There's a French, Portuguese, Spaniards arriving to the region, Netherlands also, and it started to the colonization of the Brazilian Amazon. So it's between the 1540s and 1670s that many people entered to the Brazilian Amazon through the Amazon River and started to settle in the riverside. They call themselves, and they exist until nowadays, they call themselves the Riberinos. They become traditional communities. If we move further, of course, Then we have the Brazilian Empire. We engage with the First Republic. But there's two big movements that happened in between 1870s and 1912 and then 1942 and 1945. Of course, this has to do with the two big world wars that we had, but also at the same time, it's because of the resources that are already in the Amazon forest that had to be extracted, which is the rubber tappers boom. So all these rubber tappers, many people enter into the forest to actually start harvesting the rubber tappers because it was going to be used at a global level, and there was a lot of investment from many governments into entering into the forest. But we have one particular movement that we're going to be focusing today, which is the military government, which started in the 1964. And it started with the idea that, yes, we have a huge area that is empty, that no one is inhabit. And I make commas with my hands because they said, no one is inhabiting this land. So we have to use this land, we have to inhabit this land, and we have to actually extract all the resources possible that we have there. So we enter with the idea to necessity to occupy the land to engender the national economic development. And these discourses already of development into the region started in the 1964 with the military government. Because of that, of course, there's the openness of many mega roads that to enter into the forest and enable the extraction of resources. There are other discourses after this one that also had or have been having a lot of implementation into the forest. Of course, with the new republic in 1985, the military government ends, but and the new democratic government started in 1985. But that does not mean that these developmental discourses finish. And also another big movement happened in 1992 with the Rio de Janeiro summit, when the focus or the international focus, it's open, the Brazilian Amazon is open, so many NGOs and many people start looking at what's happening into the Amazon forest, and they're also coming on other discourses that will have a lot of implementation or a lot of implication into the Brazilian Amazon. So we're going to the 1970s because we're going to be focusing on one single developmental process that happened, which is the construction of the BR 163. So it's this red line that we can see, red and blue line, but the red line is the one that is actually into the Brazilian Amazon. It's about, the whole line, it's about 3,500 square kilometers, but the part that it's in the Amazon forest is about 1,700 kilometers long, and it's opening in between 1971 and 1976. So how they open actually, like the military government entered with bulldozers coming from Cuiabá all the way north and Santarém from south and engaging at the very middle. And they enter with bulldozers and chains and they just start into the forest in order to open. So we have here some photos of how it actually look like. So they're just starting to open everything and they say, okay, we already have the opportunity to enter into the forest. We can already extract the resources. So we have to actually put people into the forest, into this inhabited land to start occupying, to start extracting the resources. So with the slogan of integrate or occupy or not to hand over, they actually hired private companies and bring a lot of people from the southern states of Brazil, and they call it the southern invasion. So they start colonizing the Brazilian Amazon through this moment from the 1972. So the thing is that they open the road, but that does not mean that they actually pave the road or they provide services. They just open the road in order for people to start entering into the Amazon forest and taking over these spaces and taking over these resources. Something really particularly in this case is that these people were there and they have been put there in order to develop and in order to progress or in order to be the heroes of the nation, which are the discourses used by the national government. But that does not mean that, as I said, they were putting a lot of effort into service to provide to them. So actually, this road was only, the discussion of being paid started in 2004, and it only started to be paved in 2017. So during this whole time, there was about a lot of discussion on how to proceed, but at the same time, there were a lot of people entering through these roads without services and engaging with the Amazon forest itself in order to make a productive land. So what we have here is actually the the sustainable plan that was developed in 2004 in order to how to proceed in what it was already happening, which was a lot of deforestation, but how to proceed with the pavement and of course all the discussion that we see. So we're going to be focusing today, as I said, on particularly a municipality that is located specifically in this road, the BR 163, and that's the municipality of Novo Progreso. And that's already the name comes with the discourse itself, because Novo Progreso translates itself as new progress. The municipality is located in the margins of the BR 163. It's been founded in 1973, but became a municipality in 1993. And it has about 2,500 inhabitants. Right now, it looks kind of like this. So you can see the road in the middle and, you know, the urban area of the municipality of Novo Progreso. And why important to focus on this municipality? Well, because of all the dynamics that are happening and all that are proud of these dynamics. In the right side, we can see the shield of the municipality and are the same photos that we can see on the left side, which is mining, logging, livestock, and agriculture. And that's already the representation of this Novo Progreso or New Progress municipality. Of course, these dynamics and these discourses have been putting a lot of pressure in the land and creating a lot of deforestation. Novo Progreso it's in the top 10 municipalities highly deforested in the whole Amazon forest, and only with a trend that it's increasing through time. So now that we know exactly where we're going to be working and which focus are we having, we're going to be talking about the research focus and methodology. So as I said, we have two analyses that I will be presenting today, and we have two main questions. The first question is related to the social media and newspapers analysis that I conducted in order to understand what the discourses are in the Brazilian Amazon, and particularly in the state of Pará. And the second is to understand how the rural producers, so people inhabiting this municipality of Novo Progreso, what are the positioning and narratives, and if they have shaped or not land use management in the agricultural frontier. So basing on these two questions, I would like to start with the first analysis, which is the methods for the state of Pará itself, which is this media analysis that was conducted between September 2020 and October 2021. So 1 year of analyzing through two newspapers, which is the Folha de São Paulo. Folha de São Paulo is a national newspaper, is the second highest distributed, and is the most critical towards the government. Then I conducted an analysis on the newspaper O Liberal, which is the highest distributed newspaper in the state of Pará. And finally, as I'm also trying to understand the pluriverse, I was trying to identify a place of pluriversal voices. So not one single direction discourses, but many multidirectional discourses. And I use the social media, formerly known as Twitter, now is X. So based on that, the idea to extract the information was reading during 1 year every day the newspaper to get all the articles that were based on social environmental dynamics. And I used a Twitter API in order to extract the information from Twitter. There was a total of 359 articles from Folha de São Paulo, which is the national, then 1,343 articles and more than 1,000 tweets. So when I saw this kind of information, I said, okay, it's just a lot of information about all of this topic, which is agriculture, biodiversity, climate change, energy, etc., many more. So I decided to focus particularly only on the two more mentioned or more frequent topics that were identified, which were agriculture and forest. So based on that, I decided to conduct an analysis on 25 articles from Folha de São Paulo, 50 articles from Liberal, and 215 tweets. What I did afterwards was I developed a coded system using MaxQDA, and in order to identify what were the discourses and what we're talking about, who was creating these discourses, and who was involved in these discourses, of course, I created this coded system, but I basically focus on topics and stakeholders in order to answer. The second part of the analysis is the ethnographic work that I conducted in the municipality of Novo Progreso. So I had the opportunity to talk with many rural producers in the municipality of Novo Progreso. I conducted a biographical semi-structural interviews where we actually I created this timeline with them in order to understand what were they doing before coming to the region, why did they came to the region, what activities are currently happening on the region, and what will they like to do in the future. So it was this timeline in order to understand, based on their narratives and based on their discourses, to understand how they have shaped or not the land use in Novo Progreso. So, as I said, there was these biographical interviews. It was recorded talks with 36 rural producers that I had the opportunity to talk to and record. And of course, I use observation methods, but also I employ their narratives and methods as walk along or coffee table in order to sit with them and also to explore their narratives and perceptions about land and forests in the Amazon forest. So in this second part, of course, I again use MaxQDA to identify this. There was a transcript audio of about 40 hours. And of course, I conducted also this content analysis through MaxQDA. So some of the research process is also something that most of the time we lack on talking about. And we lack on putting sometimes even in our articles or in our research. And it's about the difficulties, but also the interactions that we have while we're doing the process. And this is something that I would like to take the opportunity to talk to you, because I think it's something worldwide to remember, and to, if there are students here, also to engage with this idea of how actually the research process happens itself when you're going to a field work. And in this case, of course, there were some difficulties that I had to go through, which are like, for instance, the long distances that are in between these huge road that you have to cross in order to encounter these farmlands and these gates and knock on these gates. There was, of course, heavy rainfall and unpaved roads, inability of producers responsible for land use decision. Also, trust building, it was really difficult because of the global reporting on deforestation. And we were going to be talking a little bit further specifically about this point, and also about like getting the voice recording permission. And this what part of voice recording permission happens that many journals right now are asking to have these recording permissions. Of course, it's really important to have the consideration to have the recording permissions and to have everything recorded. But at the same time, in the field work, it's really complicated sometimes when you're asking to record someone in order to state something already. So those are the counterparts that I like to sometimes expose in this kind of presentation, because this is also things that are shaping the research that we're doing. So now we're engaging with the part of the results and discourse about land and forest. And first, we're going to engage with the media analysis that I conducted. And as I said, we have the 3 newspapers. And here, or in these cases, I found 2 main discourses. One that goes about production and development, and one's about that goes on conservation. As I said, Folha de Sao Paulo, it's a national newspaper, the second heavily distributed. And here, the focus of production and development are using, for instance, the topic of agribusiness or large companies. Those are the topics, but also those are the people who are talking through the newspapers. And when we talk about conservation, it comes with a global scale of what is happening in climate change. So many international governments talking about climate change, and also the policies and the things that are happening in the Brazilian Amazon when we talk about climate change. Of course, the national government policies and discourses that are been happening, and large rural producers talking mainly about how this should be the conservation in the Brazilian Amazon. When we engage, for instance, with the O Liberal, which is the state's newspaper, the highly distributed, then it changed a little bit the perspective. They also talk about production and development, but talk way, of course, from a local perspective. So they use many local stakeholders to talk about the production and development. And when they talk about conservation, they use, again, climate change as a global model idea of how climate change should be mitigated or adapted towards it. But they're using information from many local universities, local NGOs, local research institutes, and in general, local stakeholders. So with this shapes differently a little bit the information, but at the same time, the discourse comes from the international perspective of how to mitigate climate change at a local level. And then when we talk about X social media. Here I selected the 70 highly retweeted tweets. This was based on an average, these 17. And here it changed a little bit because it's not only talking about production and development or conservation, but going in the idea of pro-production and development and pro-conservation. This means that if we are going, if the discourse says this is pro-conservation, it's not even to consider to talk about production or development. It's only totally pro-conservation. On the other hand, it's pro-production. So we are producing and we do not care anymore about these ideas of sustainable development or other idea of conservation. It's just pro-production and pro-development. So here we can see that, for instance, right-wing politicians, digital newspaper, journalists, and governmental accounts are the ones that are going into the discussion of pro-production and development. And when we talk about pro-conservation, there's international NGOs and newspapers that are talking about pro-conservation. Something really important that I found here is that in both sides, either pro-production or pro-conservation, these discourses are using scientific information. So scientific journals, either international or national authors, in order to justify these discourses already. So this is something to take in consideration. And finally, I identify what I call the win-win discourse. And this is about production and development and conservation again. And I call it the win-win discourse. This is mainly comes from the national or local government, that with the idea of when we're producing and we are developing the region, we are earning money through the production. So they're investing a lot of policies or a lot of efforts in order to further develop the region, further develop the production of agricultural production in the region. But on the other hand, we also talk, or they also talk about conservation a lot. And in this case, for instance, I will put the example of the state of Pará. The state of Pará is the heavily deforested state in the Amazon forest. And there's a lot of crop production policies that being implemented. But during Bolsonaro government, it was one of the only states that actually maintained their funding from international sources in order to conserve. So they were getting money from Germany, from Canada, from the US in order to procure conservation into the state of Pará. So they're actually going in both directions or playing with both discourses in order to get this win-win discourse. So now we're moving forward to the second analysis, which is the ethnographic analysis. And it's something really important that I would like to talk about is why to talk or why to do this ethnographic analysis, and particularly with rural producers. First, of course, because the most often topic or discourse is about agricultural production in the state of Pará. And at the same time, they were mostly mentioned these rural producers, but also because of the dynamic of the agricultural frontier that is happening in these states. And the agricultural frontier has many colonial definitions itself, but I like to just call it as an idea of a violent conversion of native habitats to agriculture. So just to put an example, I would like to show you this graph, but which is an example of how an agricultural frontier could happen. So first we have a family who is being invited either by the government or they actually approach to the forest. They start this part of forest appropriation. Once they enter into the forest, then they started cutting, they're extracting the resources, cutting the trees, extracting the important woods, extracting the important resources of the land. Then they use a fire. Why they use fire? Because they want to put pasture for cattle production. And this is a repetitive process that might happen for about 10 to 15 years. Why is it a repetitive process? What is the goal of this pasture and cattle and use of fire, pasture and use of fire? Well, the idea is to flatten the land as much as possible in order to get or create monocultures. Why? Because the creation of monocultures will increase the price of the land, and that will give the opportunity to the family to either they can sell the land or they can keep the land to create their own monocultures. In this example, the family say, okay, let's sell the land. And now with a little bit of money or a lot of money, they can engage or enter further north into the forest again in order to start the process again. So how does it actually look like this in real life? Well, this is a time slot from 2013 to 2018 of the first part. Is the forest appropriation, resources extraction, and use of fire. And if we want to see it a little bit further, how it actually looks like, this is how it looks by the road. This is a time slot from 2001 to 2000, from 2000, I'm sorry, to 2018. And that's how actually the agricultural frontier is taking over the Brazilian Amazon. So now we have had the opportunity to talk about what's happening into the municipality of Novo Progreso. I would like to get you as much as closer possible to the municipality of Novo Progreso. So I would like to ask you again for 30 seconds of your time, just to close your eyes if you want to, because we're going to enter into the Brazilian Amazon. So I will let you know when this happens. That's in 3, 2, 1. And now we can open our eyes, and we just went to the main lake of the municipality of Novo Progreso, a place where people just go in their afternoons or evenings just to relax, just to enjoy, and just to have different activities, sport activities, or so on. So coming from this idea, what happens or what were the observations that I had in the Brazilian Amazon? And as I said, well, the rural producers, it's based on a farm system, a General Dynamics. So they produce mainly soy and maize in the region. They have cattle production, they have fruit production and fish production. When we talk about cattle production, it's either for produce milk or breeding, and also for production of meat consumption. So there's many important things that happen when we talk about rural producers that are or dynamics that are important for them. Of course, the size of the land, it will shape what the activities they will have. So that's really important, and that's mainly important in many cases, not only here. But also something that is really particular here is the closest to the roads. So depending on how close to the road is the easiest, they can get their products out of the forest or their lands and put it into their markets. Also, the relief in the area is really important in order to shape the land, because if we have a slope, it's not possible to put soy or maize, because this is mechanized systems. So then they will engage with the cattle production. Of course, another thing that are really important when we're talking about what dynamics they can do is the financing opportunities and the services that are provided. So as I said, it's during the year, the dynamics are changing, and of course the dynamics of the rural producer changes with the seasons. And they have 3 main seasons. From October to January is the production of soy production and cattle and breeding. This happened during this month. Then from February to May, we enter into the maize production and again cattle production. And finally, during June and September, it's the dry season. So during this time, it engaged mainly with vaccination and medication for the cattle production. So the land actually stops working. So people who work in the land, they have the opportunity, they actually call it the summer, even though at this time it's winter. They call it their summer because it's dry time. And that's exactly when they can engage with other different activities. Other different activities is engaging with other income sources, going to the urban area and having the ones they can, they have their stores or something, other activities, or working in the stores itself, but also engage with the part of logging and fire, because we have heard a lot about the day of the fire and the fires that are happening. Well, this is the dry season, and this is the time that is occurring, this part of dynamics, and also mining. So traditional mining is happening, or irregular mining is happening during this time. So once I presented a little bit of how it's shaped or what the activities or dynamics that they're having, I would like to tell you what the people were telling me. After talking to them, what was found during talking to them. And something that I got the opportunity to do in this ethnographic work is to identify their narratives through time. So this is really important and really different. Normally, when we talk about rural producers, they're identifying the big rural producer, the small rural producer, the medium-sized rural producer. But in this case, the idea was to identify a little bit different with the idea of how they actually engage through time and through their narratives with the land and how it was shaped. So there were three trends that were identified of rural producers. Of course, when the road was opened from 1972, they started to arrive. So this is the construction and migration for first migration process. Then the second part is the increasing of external pressure. Remember that I told you about how the Rio Submit also put a lot of eyes into the area and a lot of pressure into the area of NGOs or international organizations that were actually looking at the Amazon forest. And finally, the third trend is the intensive developmental process. Again, we're talking about we are paving the roads. So this brought another developmental process to the region. So these three trends already, they actually were based on these planned projects or dynamics. So when talking to the people, they were not mentioned about these plans, projects, or dynamics. They were not putting the name, so they do not say por la Amazonía, but they were referring to the implications of these policies. So they were saying, oh yeah, in 1974, there was a project that they were bringing development to the region through this or that. So that's how these plans, projects, or dynamics were identified during this time. So something really important that was identified during this time is that the discourses of development. So these projects that are signed right here, it's because they were with the aim or the idea of development. But also there were another ones that were implemented with the idea of conservation. And some of them, for instance, in 2009, we can see the one that is Terra Legal program. And according to the rural producers, the idea was to conserve or to protect the lands. But this project, and according to them, evolved into a project or dynamic that actually brought much more deforestation or also changed to development thought process through time. So during these projects, plans, or dynamics, and during these three trends, I had the opportunity to talk to people who arrived to the region in these years. So 15 people arrived during the construction and migration part, 9 of them increased to the increasing external pressure, and 12 to the intensive development thought processes. How these plans or projects actually shape the lands, how it actually changed during this time. And as we can see here, this is the first trend. So this is the construction of the BR100 road, the openness. It's the Novo Progreso urban area. And at this time, there was only the identification of the indigenous land that is on this site, which is the Kayapol land. By the second trend, already the land shape completely changed in this idea. And then it was the creation of the municipality of Novo Progreso. There were the creation of sustainable the settlement projects and sustainable development settlement projects, and also the creation of federal conservation areas, which also brought new dynamics into what was happening into the region. Finally, in the last one of the most important things that shaped the lands or shaped the processes was the actual pavement of the BR-163, which brought many more people into the region, but also brought many other dynamics. So now I would like to ask you to be focused on these two blue squares on the top left, because we're going to be zooming in to actually, so you can see how actually land looks like nowadays. And we can see right here in pink, this is the one on the top and this is the one on the bottom. And those are settlement projects. Those are people who have 40 acres per plots. So families that had the opportunity to get this land. And all around, we have actually how the land has been plotted and divided through time since people arrived to the region. So something differently that happened here, in contrast to other parts of the Amazon, is that here the government decided to give, from the very beginning, 100 acres of land to per family. But that does not mean that if a family of 5 people came, then each one could have these 100 acres of land. That means that means that many people here are huge landowners. So we're starting to count that the small rural producers, it's in between 8 and 40, but the medium-sized rural producer will start about 500 hectares. And a big rural producer will start then from 1,200 hectares, and it could go all the way up to 3,000 and 5,000. So I had the possibility to also talk with many types of rural producers, which does not mean that they have the same issues, but they have different ideas or difficulties. Also, something that happened during time is these red plots, which is the land under embargo. These lands under embargo actually have been shaping the dynamics because since 2009, enter a new law that to conserve the forest. And this idea is if you deforested before the 2008, it's fine. But if you deforested after, then your land will be embargoed and then your product will not be able to be sold. So these are kind of the dynamics that are shaping the discourses also that are shaping the land in Nuevo Progreso. So now we're entering in actually to get to know the people I talk with. And this is the part where I had the most fun talking, of course, with people. And as I said, they were divided in three main stages. First, for instance, I would like to introduce you Mr. Luis, who is a pioneer. He arrived between 1972 and 1991. Then we have Mr. Paulo, who is the second generation. He arrived during the second trend, and he is a small landowner, and he produces milk. He arrived between 1992 and 2006. And finally, we have Mrs. Sara and Mr. Tiago, who arrived in the third trend, in which I call the soy generation, and arrived between 2007 and 2022. And of course, when I say these names, it's actually how they represent themselves. So they call themselves pioneers, they call themselves second generation, and the part of the soy generation that I changed it a little bit, but they themselves identify the people who are coming to the region to produce soy, which is another developmental process. Then something that, for instance, I had the opportunity to see is the migration and previous land tenure and how it actually inflected into the region. For instance, Mr. Luis says, I came from Rio Grande do Sul, so he came also from the south. My dad had land, but not enough for the 12 of us. So that's why he decided to enter into the Amazon forest. Mr. Paulo said, I came from Paraná. My dad did not have enough lands. So I stopped in Mato Grosso, a southern state, which is the base of the soy production in Brazil. And then he worked there. That's where he learned his techniques in order to enter into the Brazilian Amazon. And Mrs. Sara, for instance, said, I saw cheaper land. I saw a land of opportunity and decided to come to the Brazilian Amazon, or to Nuevo Progreso particularly. Something that is really important is that the discourses, either local but also global discourses and regional discourses, are impacting the land use decision through time. So, for instance, Mr. Luis says, the government told us to make productive land. And that's what I was telling you. They offered them land, but they have to actually deforest. So they were giving 100 hectares per family. They have to deforest 50 of them in order to actually have the tenure of the land, to produce the land. Mr. Paulo said, when we arrived, we did everything to survive. Now they tell us we cannot do what we did. So now, through time, Mr. Paulo said, okay, I had to deforest. The government told me to deforest, but now they're telling me that everything that I have been doing in order to all of these years, when we didn't have enough resources, when they didn't have enough support, it's bad. It's been forbidden. And Mrs. Sara, for instance, says, again, there is no climate change in the region. It rains the same all the time. And then comes with this idea of negation of the climate change. And we're going to be further talking into that. But it's really important because there's a lot of people like me, or many universities, or many NGOs that are entering into the forest and then starting to engage with this idea of what climate change is. And they have already foreseen that the climate change are the kind of policies or the kind of discourses that are impeding them, the development. And the development that sometimes they want to procure because the government told them that they have to procure the development into the region and they have to be productive region. So it's also discourses that they have been adapting from different sources. There's been a historical shift in roles and position. At the beginning, for instance, Mr. Luis said, the government just brought the people and abandoned us here. So they left them without any resources, without anything. But then Mr. Paulo said, okay, at this time, we created communities, which is like church-based, but also a school-based and many services-based area. And they actually created their own municipality. So the president of the municipality is actually a rural producer because they have got this huge influence in the region, and they have a lot of power in the region now because of the activities. And for instance, Mr. Tiago said, I planted my crops in the past on a rented land. Today, I cultivate about 1,500 alqueires, which is about 300 hectares of land that they're cultivating. So the position and the power also have been shaping. So they from being the vulnerable people, they have also have become the really strong people into the region. Finally, I would like to say that they have created their ontologies intersections with many epistemologies. Mr. Rees says, we have learned from indigenous and miners. We know how to survive in the land. Mr. Paulo said, I don't want to move out. I love the weather, the summer, the animals. And there now the agricultural frontier has been engaging into a process that many companies are arriving to the region in order to buy these plots of land because they have entered into the process. Now the land is flattened, and now the prices are in a fixed price that a company can buy it, and then they're being pushed further north in order to get more land into the forest. But they do not want to leave this land. And something really particular that I found here is that almost all of the rural producers said, we love to be rural producers. We love to produce in the land. We love the land that we're living on. So just to give you an example, and again, we're back on this example of historical plans and projects and how these actually have been shaping the land, how these courses have implications. I would like you to focus on 2007 into the graph. Well, this is 2008 where it starts. And it's actually with the payment of the BR 163 when they started discussion again. So it's actually an increasing of deforestation. This is the increase of deforestation of the municipality. But then we can see that in 2008 to 2012, we have some projects that actually, if you compare with the data, then there was a decrease on deforestation. And if we go back to 2019, that's actually when the pavement of the roads finished somehow, and also when Bolsonaro arrived to the government. So there's again an increasing of deforestation and high increasing of deforestation on the region. And that's actually how we can see that these discourses, these developmental discourses, but also these conservation discourses have a deep implication on how some dynamics can happen. Finally, two questions that I would like to talk or go through because of these discourses is, how do local producers perceive conservation or climate change? And what does development mean for rural producers? And we've been discussing about it a little bit today. But for instance, they say climate does not change in this region. Climate is optimal for production. But at the same time, they say, I do not want more land. I want more productive land. So they do not want to advance completely all the time the frontier. But at the same time, they say, let us produce. This is not the Amazon anymore. So in this case, for instance, climate change adaptation is not yet relevant in land use scenarios, in land use decisions among rural producers. But at the same time, they think that development comes through production, and production has the implication of market competition. And this market competition has brought many more deforestation into the forest. So this was the part of the results. I would like to then just finish with the part of the reflection and take-home messages. And I call this the coffee and terere reflection because mainly terere, it was something that was offered to me when I was arriving to their houses, when I was knocking doors, and when people actually wanted to talk to me, they were offering me terere and coffee. And terere is really particular because it's not from the Amazon forest. It's actually coming from the south with them, and they have put it into the forest. So that's kind of how they share their knowledge. It's actually just one glass that everybody drinks from the same glass. This is a kind of mate, and it's a cold mate. And then if they want to engage with conversation or exchange knowledge, they will offer you terere or coffee. I would like to say that this research was molded for different reasons, yes, because it's a finance, and I'm coming from a German university, which ECS or facilitate my research field. I was taking easier with people, or people were embracing me more because I'm a Latin American male in the field, but also saying that I was coming from a German university, that were at some point I was identified as being the German. I'm Mexican, I'm not Brazilian, and that also shaped the things. But this part of me saying that I was coming from a university, then at some point saying that I was coming from a German university, allowed me to get a little bit deeper with many more people. And that's things that shape somehow. And I think is important to mention that this has these circumstances and my position have influenced the research. Of course, this research has limitations. There's a scope limited by sources selection, but also by stakeholder representation. What I'm presenting today is just some discourses from the media, but also some discourses from some media and from some stakeholders. And there are many more stakeholders in the region. I haven't mentioned, of course, but there are indigenous populations, there are miners, there are loggers. There's people who are working in the urban and rural areas that are not rural producers or landowners, but also they might have, or they should have their own position and their own narratives in order to what's happening into the region. And this work is an inspiration for future research, for the exploration to complex reversal entanglements, because I understand this is a complex reversal entanglement. Finally, some take-home messages. I would like to say that many historical and current dynamics have to be taken into account to understand deforestation and expansion of the agricultural frontier. Global and regional and local discourses impact land and forest decisions, in this case of the municipality of Nuevo Progreso. So for instance, we have the wind discourse that impacts into the region, but also the negation of climate change, or the rural producers' ontologies and epistemologies that they have created towards land and towards forest are actually having impact in land and forest decision. Finally, some rural producers have diverse perception of land, and each participates differently in shaping local land use dynamics. And I was saying, this is just one discourse. There are many other discourses, and maybe some of them are actually in contrast towards what the rural producers says in this region. And finally, adaptation and mitigation to climate change do not play a significant role into their normal activities, but the discourse itself, coming from outside and arriving to the region, has a deep implication into land use and shape into the Amazon forest. So with this, I would like to thank you very much for your attention, and thank you all of you for being here, and I'm looking forward to your questions.
Thank you, Carlos. Are you hearing the knock? We're knocking the desk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. It was a very insightful presentation. Yeah, I have a lot of questions, but I would like to open the floor to the persons here in the room, and the persons that are online, and the persons in the Universidad Rosario in Bogota, to ask something about your presentations. I think is very interesting in the context of our series lecture, to have a conference like yours, because shows what is the development doing in terms of the impacts of in the environmental impacts today. And of course, it's very interesting your call to research from this pluriverse perspective and multi-species perspective. I have some questions about that, but let me ask here the persons in the room that are present in the different formats if they have some questions. Okay, there's one question in the chat. You can read it. I would like to ask here if there's yeah, Yana. We have 3 questions. So Yana, Miriam, Daniel. We hear these 4 questions. The question that you have in the chat, and we have 3 questions here. We have around half hour for the discussion. We hear the questions, and I hope you can react to these questions or rapidly or in a synthetic way in order to give opportunity to the others to ask. Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you for your talk. And I think you mentioned it just at the end of your talk that you just work or that you especially work with one discourse. But I wanted to ask if you observed any resistance in the field work you did.
It's a question about the resistance is if you find it. Miriam?
Yes, thank you very much for this very inspiring presentation. I wanted to ask you where the pluriverse comes in your analysis. I guess it is at the point where you mentioned that farmers who settled in the Amazon region created their own ontology and that there were intersections with many epistemologies. So could you explain that a little bit? What do these ontologies and intersections with many epistemologies look like?
Daniel?
Thank you so much, Carlos. I have two questions. I would like to know, in comparison with the more classical definitions of development, for example, those that configured no progreso during the military government, do you find in your fieldwork significant transformations of how development is conceptualized by the state, the media, the inhabitants? What are the new dynamics of development in contemporary Brazil that we can contrast with the 20th century? And my second question is regarding NGOs or the current government that apparently is more committed with the environmental rights. I would like to know if this pluriverse point of view is already incorporated in the ways of approaching the territory to negotiate the limits of development and progress in Brazilian Amazon. Thank you.
Cool. So should I start responding or?
Yes, we have a 4 question here. I hope you can.
Oh yeah, just one last part. It was Daniel. Your last question. I'm sorry. The part of territoriality I didn't. Could you elaborate a little bit?
Yeah, regarding NGOs concerned about environmental rights, or I guess I don't know the whole scenario, but the current government with the fight for environmental rights. Is there a consciousness about these pluriverse ways of approaching territory to establish the limits of development and progress with the inhabitants of Novo Progreso? Yeah.
Okay, and Carlos, we hear one question more here in the room, please.
Yeah.
Carlos, so my question is, have you also talked with indigenous peoples in the region? And if you did, like, what is the view that the rural producers have of indigenous peoples, and what's the vision that the indigenous peoples have of the rural producers, and how do these two different populations interact with one another or integrate, or like how does this integration happen?
Perfect.
So please react to the questions.
Okay. I will start with Jana, who mentioned about the resistance. And what I understood as a resistance in this case, or how I perceive it, it was just there was a lot of resistance with the rural producers to talk to me. So it was really, really hard to approach them and to actually get into their circle. It's a really, let's say, private circle to engage with. There were many things that allowed me to actually get in touch with them or start talking with them. So, as I said, they're coming from the south. Formerly, their families are European or Japanese. So they're colonizers who arrived into the southern region of Brazil, and then they were brought to the Brazilian Amazon. They identify themselves as Germans, as Italians, as Spaniards. Of course, they're Brazilians in third or fourth generation, but when you talk to them, and the first question that we were telling them, or I was asking, is like, where are you coming from? Where's your family coming from? And many of them said, oh yeah, my family is from Germany. You're also coming from Germany, right? And that's how the interaction actually allowed me to start talking with them, because it was like there was like something in common. I was the foreigner, like them, but in the Brazilian Amazon. But at the same time, there was a lot of resistance when the topic changed, when we start talking about how's the weather, is there climate change, or I mean, the word climate change already was like a cut over. It's just a stop of discussion, a stop of conversation. We're not discussing this. Please leave my land. Even people were telling me, I would like to invite you water. If you want to take water or drink water, please drink water. But we will not be talking about this topic with you ever. So of course, these discourses that arrived into the region with, for instance, many NGOs entering in the 2000s, put a lot of pressure into their activities. And those are the resistance that I actually identified myself. So many of the times I have to navigate or to talk to them in order to build trust and to make it possible to actually avoid, or not avoid, but navigate this resistance that I was having into the region. And of course, it was honestly, it's a place that is not welcome for everyone. So it's something just to take sometimes in consideration, that it's not welcoming place for many outsiders, definitely. Then Mia talk about pluriverse. How do I engage with the pluriverses and in this case, and how do I identify the pluriverse in this research? And I would like to share one more time my screen, because something I actually sorry, I don't know how to do this again. This one. And something I am promoting with my research is actually what I call the this is the complexities of the pluriverse itself. That it talks about the strict relativism, practical implementation, potential of romanticization. That is something that happens into the pluriverse. And something that I found is that the pluriverse do not talk, or they have the absence of inclusion of populations or groups that are between the universal and pluriversal worlds. And that's what I called the intersecting hybrid context. So these contexts that are touching the pluriverse, but at the same time are touching the universal world. For me, the rural producers of Novo Progreso are these intersecting hybrid contexts. That means that they navigate through this universal world, but at the same time, they establish an entanglements with other pluriverse, and they're creating their own pluriverse and ontologies. How is this represented itself? How this actually look like in real life? Is this part of where they're saying, or they're telling me, I love the land, I love the place, I do not want to keep deforesting, for instance. I do not want to, or I do not need to more lands. With what I have, it's perfect. I want to produce more. So how do I produce more in this case? And also at the same time, it's like, we have learned, in this case, there's another question, but I will further go into that one. But there's like, I have learned from indigenous communities on how to live or survive in the lands. I have learned from miners that the miners are more in contact with indigenous populations, and then the miners are getting in touch with the rural producers because they got sick of malaria. And then if they got malaria, who knows how to survive in the middle of the forest with malaria? Well, the indigenous population have teach them how to survive, and they have learned through generations on how to live without medical assistance, but at the same time living in the Amazon forest. So those are kind of the entanglements, but also the ontologies and epistemologies that the relations that they have created towards land and towards the forest that are like actually intersecting. So at the same time that they're like they need to produce, or they have this land and they live under the certain developmental or universal standards. At the same time, they are producing or they are getting their own knowledge. They are actually embracing their own different ways of doing. And that's what, for me, the rural producers of Nuevo Progreso, this is intersecting hybrid context. I hope I got that one. And then Daniel, you asked me how development is conceptualized with the new government or in Nuevo Progreso itself. And let me just stop sharing. I'm sorry. Yes. Well, I didn't want to put my how I understand the development itself, but talking through the narratives of how people understand development. And for them, development is what the discourses that they have been learned through time. So they went to the forest because they were mentioned that they were going to be the heroes of the nation for being to the forest in order to protect the land and to develop the land. So for them, the development is a part of proudness also. So they feel proud of being rural producers. They feel proud of develop their region. And for them developing, they call it, we want to bring the civilization, that's how I say, into the Amazon forest. There's a southern, the southern state of Mato Grosso is the actual base of the soy production, and it's 500 kilometers away from Novo Progreso, the municipality of Cuiabá, which is the municipality of the biggest production of soy in Brazil. So they say, we want to develop, we want to be the new Cuiabá. So that's the aim of development, or how they perceive development when we talk about how they want to see the forest, how they want to shape their land and the resources they want to have. So many people, they leave because they say, we do not have services. We're getting older. So for them, development is also means having the resources and having the services that they need to have there. But at the same time, it's conflicted with this idea of there's things that they need, but they do not want like huge companies to arrive to the region. They do not want to move further north. They do not want to advance the frontier. They want to stay where they are. They want their land. So this is the kind of a conflicting story that you hear. It's like, I do not want to leave. I do not want to, I want to be living here, but at the same time, I have to foresee how is it going to be for me in the future. Kind of that. And with the part of the NGOs and the new government, the pluriverse idea, we have to consider that, of course, the new government is comes with the idea of procureness of the Amazon forest, but it's also during the previous government of Lula, but also and then Dilma and then also this government, that the new developmental processes do not stop. I mean, during these governments, also developmental processes happening, huge developmental processes happening as construction of mega infrastructure happening into the Amazon. It just changes the direction. I mean, there was a huge support towards the rural banquets in the Congress with Bolsonaro. Now that has changed, but the policies itself, we have to acknowledge that the policies itself, they changed the idea of the dynamic, but the impact in the forest is still happening through these years. So it's not that it's going completely down this part of the deforestation. The deforestation keep increasing year by year. So of course, the engagement is different. The type of policy is different. Lula, for instance, said proposed this Terra Legal project to allow the people to actually get the tenure of the land. But of course, at the same time, through this policy, many people got tenure of many more lands because they decided to deforest in order to get the tenure because this policy was existing. So, I mean, there's also this kind of win-win discourse that I was being mentioned. You know, we are at the same time, they know that the resources and resources have to be, or they want it to be extracted somehow, and they want it to be used, and that procures something for the people. So that's how I see it. And well, I mean, Brazil also engaged with the pluriversal concept now in the constitution when talking about indigenous population. So, but at the same time, I mean, there are many more populations that are not being recognized, for instance. And there's something or some processes that are it's not only happening in Brazil, but in many other countries that they're engaging with the pluriversal concept through NGOs, but also through their constitutions. And that does not mean that they're acknowledging everything, but it's just a step by step that is happening. And this last question from the room about indigenous and how is like this relation between indigenous and rural producers. It's well, it's it's quite. I mean, let's be honest, and I will tell you how I confronted it. I was in January. I was in a congress in Poland, in Sweden, yes, and in Lund, and it's a political ecology. And I was presenting this part of, or some part of exactly these discourses, rural producers. And at the end, I ended up talking with some people from Brazil, and she's not talking about my presentation, but at the end, I ended up asking like, hey, how you feel about my presentation? What do you thought? You're Brazilian. I would like to get your feedback. And then she told me, well, Carlos, I gotta be honest. What you're proposing, it's really nice, but I cannot agree with that. I'm an indigenous leader living here and advocating for indigenous communities. And the people that you're talking about have burned and have killed and have embraced with many activities that I do not agree and I cannot agree with, you know. And I understand that this pluriversal concept sounds really nice. And so let's talk and discuss. But these discussions are kind of impossible for me to have. And of course, at that moment, it was kind of, or it still is a shock, you know, when we're talking about this. Of course, as I'm saying, I'm not Brazilian, I'm a foreigner. I'm just trying to display what I observe and how I perceive it. But also in these entanglements with the pluriverse, for me, these entanglements with the pluriverse are these kind of hard questions and kind of these hard discussions where not everybody will agree, but we'll still have to have them. This tackles two questions. First, of course, how the pluriverse are seen or how I perceive them, but also how indigenous and rural producers identify themselves. They know they're there, they exist, but they have to entangle, they have to embrace each other because they have to share parts, but at the same time, there's a lot of fights and a lot of violence and a lot of discussion. So the idea of this project is to present discourses, but at the same time present discourses in order for people to start thinking, okay, how can we actually get into further conversation? How can we actually make something out of these many discourses that exist in the region that are conflicting each other and that are in contrast to each other? So those are kind of like the actual interactions that happen in the field with the rural producers and indigenous communities, but also with many other communities. They're not the only ones, but yeah, with many others. And I will answer the one that is here in the chat. The question is, why are projects such as the construction of the BR 163 highway considered part of developmental projects and mutual benefit discourses, where everybody wins, when the same sources you mentioned indicates that the environmental damage outweighs the conservation efforts? Well, that's the thing. I mean, this actually these discourses is that those are the national discourses, and some of them are even like the global discourses. So when they were planning, for instance, the Sustainable Development Plan for actually paving the roads, there were many NGOs and there were many international governments and national governments and indigenous populations who had to agree on this sustainable idea. And the discourse itself that actually allowed them to pave the roads was that indigenous were going to get repairments for everything that was done in their lands. And also there were going to be policies that were going to be implemented in order to conserve the lands. So this happened, yes, but at the same time, this didn't stop the idea of we need to pave the roads and we need to still put people into the forest and still make these lands available to be productive. So is this, I mean, is this win-win discourse? It does not always mean that the people living in Nuevo Progreso had them, but or has them, but is mainly of this national idea or this state idea of a government itself saying, okay, we have the resources. We need to manage the resources somehow as we want to, but also at the same time, we can get money out of international funding. So, I mean, of course, if we can do both, they will be aiming for doing both. And that's what actually happens, with the PR 163. Then, I mean, I didn't go forward because that just started the year that I was there, and the discourses were not so extreme at that time, but now they're building a train just by the roads, and they're taking another 10 kilometers of roads along the roads just to build a train to facilitate this process. And there's in the process, there's also Canadian and German funding for the trains. So, I mean, it's this kind of playing of who has the resources and who can manage them and how.
Yeah, Carlos, yeah. What we used to be is to we hear the questions, or the students and the professor Andres writing the questions in the chat, so you can read it. There is two questions more, but I would like to ask Andres if you have more questions. It's the time for writing them. And I would like to ask Carlos to reply in a synthetic way. It's very interesting all what you were mentioned, of course, no doubt on that. I'm thinking also in the group here in Germany, because it has been a long day, and I want today they stay engaged as much as has been until now.
Okay.
So you can read the two questions, and we wait that Andres, if they have write the two questions, or if you want to say Andres, you can express your questions with your voice.
Thank you, Luis, and thank you, Carlos, for the presentation. We actually have a couple of questions. I think only one question in the chat. So they're written down two questions. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask one question of my own. And it has to do, again, I don't know if it has to do with pluriverse, but with entanglements. And the question would be, you showed us that there are actually many and different discourses around development in this municipality, Nuevo Progreso. And you showed us what were the principal or the main elements of those discourses. But I think this coexistence of discourses implies entanglement, as you said, but entanglement necessarily implies negotiation. And out of this negotiation, you get new discourses. So how are you going, if you are going to, how are you going to approach this negotiation, this pre-existing discourse, and then negotiation, and then post-negotiation discourses dynamics?
Okay.
You see my question plus the other two in the chat.
Okay. I will start with that one. It's a really tough question, honestly, because I guess that's the hardest part of this work. I mean, the pluriverse, or the nice part of the pluriverse, is to acknowledge that there are discourses, so there are other pluriverse. But of course, how do we actually manage to get to a further discussion once we acknowledge that there are many discourses? And is this part of the possible romanticization, or possible there are too many worlds? How which one do we listen to? And I guess that's part of the negotiation. And after the negotiation will come another negotiation. And after that negotiation, most probably someone will get mad, but there will have to be another negotiation. And that's part of how I imagine as a social beings we are, and we have to move forward into things. So we have to identify, for instance, in these negotiations, what are the common grounds? That's for sure. And then how to move forward. So for instance, something that we've been thinking here in the working group, it's a methodology called backcasting. And this methodology, for instance, we're thinking on the idea, okay, how do we sit all together, or the many of us together, and try to see or try to perceive what future do we want? And based on that future that we want, then we start coming back all the way to where we are, and then we plan how do we get there. And I'm pretty sure that about that negotiation, we will have something. But most probably when we start like doing steps, there will be more negotiations. And it's I mean, the pluriverse itself is a way of thinking, but it's a complex way of thinking, and that's the thing itself. That's I will not go further because of time, but that the idea, it will be way more negotiations after negotiation, and that's how we have to, I guess, approach the process of how to move forwards. In the questions here, sorry. Yes. Okay. Is a prevalent trends among the people who migrate to the Amazon? Yes, I mean, there are trends, of course, like as I said, the pioneers have these trends of people that the families came from either many Japan or European countries, and then arrived to the south of Brazil, and then enter into the forest. So that's one kind of trend. But then when we talk about the settlement projects, or when we talk about the further developmental processes, there was not trend itself. So indigenous populations already had their part there. The women in Africa, or indigenous population, they did not have any part of the settlement project. So people who were arriving from many parts of Brazil, Brazilian itself, or from many other communities itself, they arrived without having it was not identified trends. And then they were like these plots of lands in the settlements, they were rifle. So they were participating in this rifle, and whoever was there had the possibility to participate and win a piece of land in these settlement projects. And yes, there are many indigenous communities that are affected by the measure projects of the forest. As I said, like the train, it's just going on the right side of this road, and on the right side we already have the Kayapo land and Kayapo communities. So there's like, I guess, 15 families there. I don't know how many inhabitants, but one is one of the biggest indigenous lands in Brazil, and indigenous communities. I think it's in between the 5th or 6th more populated community, and that it's already it's going to happen through their land. So they have to enter now, and right now they're in negotiations on how they're going to actually allow these or not. But it's going to happen somehow. And the criteria for the newspapers and tweets analyzed, I mean, yes, I mean, I got the Folha de Sao Paulo, which I mentioned is the second most distributed newspaper in Brazil, but is a highly more critical, let's say, towards the government or towards the government policies. I mean, more critical, between brackets or so, because it's still, but it's the one that presents a counterpoint somehow when talking about socio-environmental dynamics. Then O Liberal is the highest distributed newspaper in the state of Pará. So that's why I also selected, because it's the one that reproduce much more discourses in the region. I actually intended or wanted to have a local newspaper from Novo Progresso, which actually exists, but the owner decided never to give me the information because he thought it was risky, and he thought, yeah, it was not nice to give it to me, so he didn't give it to me. And the tweets, I was using tweets in Portuguese that were talking about the state of Pará, and then we're talking about social environmental dynamics. So it was like a search query that you would use to put into this API, and then it will allow you to scrap all the information from Twitter. And then based on that, then reading all the tweets and identify what tweets are more relevant for this, for analyzing. Yeah.
Thank you, Carlos. If you have no more questions there in Bogota, do you have still questions?
No, Luis, thank you.
Okay, so just let me to say that thank you again to Carlos for this interesting presentation. Definitely, there are many challenges around this statement of making a research from a pluriverse perspective. I'm sure that in your work there are many things that you could show us about this perspective. I hope you have the opportunity to let us know this the developments, the further developments of the project. Very interesting. And yeah, the next week we stay in Brazil. We're going to have the presentation of the Professor Dr. Marco Banucchi, and he will talk about the modernization and politics in Brazil, the corporativism of middle classes. So something related to what we have here. And actually, the conference after this will be also related with Brazil. So you start today, Carlos, the series of Brazil conference on this winter lecture series. So thank you again to everybody, to the persons present here in Bogota, online, and thank you for your presence, for your participation. We meet us in hybrid form the next week. Bye-bye to everybody.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.